Hello, everyone. This is another Freedom to Feel conversation, and my guest today is George Haymaker. He is a certified transformational neuroconstructionist coach and neuroeducator. He's also the founder of George Haymaker Coaching and Consulting. George helps individuals achieve transformational changes in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors through a constructionist approach to rewire their brains. So I'm reading the bio here, about George. I know your bio is much longer than that, and this is when I read things. I'm actually not as good at it. A lot of people know that too. I love just being spontaneous and not reading things, but this is part of the episode. So, but the question that I love asking, the full bio will be at the end. My favorite question for all my guests is, how would you introduce yourself in this very moment, George? Who are you in your own words?
Well, hi, Valeria. Nice to be on with you. Thanks for having me, and hello, everyone. Um, I am on a path of recovery, which what that means to me is a never-ending pursuit of being the best version of myself. And so I'm sure we'll touch on my story and how I got to be where I am. But what has come out of all of that is just this thirst and never-ending quest to see what's next, to see how I can become better, more enlightened, a better version of myself, one that I'm, deeply proud of, that there's meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, and how I can positively impact the lives of others. I'm at a stage in my life where at 64, it's not really about me. It's about, what I can do to impact others' lives. So it's taken me a while to get to this point. Unfortunately, there's been some ups and downs, but, that's all part of the process. It's certainly developed some calluses and has allowed me to, I think, help others from a unique perspective. Whereas if I didn't have the experience I have, I might not be able to help others as, deeply as I can now.
That's something that I hear all the time about suffering and pain, how that help suffering or pain or both. It's really something that helps us to grow. Is that something that you still believe? Can we learn through inspiration, George, instead? I would love for that to be true instead of going through hard times to grow. Is that something that you teach your clients or you have experienced yourself?
Well, as you know, I come from a brain background. I teach neuroscience and do some coaching in it. And there's a thing in the brain called the pleasure pain balance. And it's like a seesaw. And the brain is always looking for balance in pleasure and pain, homeostasis. And so what happens is for people like me that pursued too much pleasure in the form of drugs and alcohol, the brain has a way of tilting the balance the other way. So if you're pursuing pleasure inordinately, then the brain has ways of, let's say, inflicting pain or causing pain in order to balance out the scale. And that's just the way that the brain works. So, with drugs and alcohol, that means, there's the pain associated with addiction, withdrawal, all the mental anguish and everything else that comes from pursuing pleasure too much. To answer your question, I think there's a lot of positives that can come from experiencing pain, such as, building resilience. Whenever there's pain, you have to respond. And so it's taught me many lessons in terms of getting back up and figuring out what's next, summoning the wherewithal to be able to do that, investigating, what that means and how that looks. And that's kind of what has brought me to this place. I think I'm no different than anyone else. All of us experience ups and downs, pain and pleasure. And I think it's, we don't learn a lot from pleasure, I don't think. I think we learn a whole lot more from pain.
That is so true, sadly. But in a way, it's not actually something to even to say that's sad, because as you said, it's something that's natural. So it's that balance again, harmony. It's like in nature, it's always trying to go back to balance. So so balance is not a feeling, is it, George? Have you how would you describe the embodiment, this concept of balance in the body mind? What does it feel like?
Yeah, I think it's definitely feelable, so to speak. It's not. I mean, we all know what feeling high feels like, in whether it's natural or not, and that's associated with increased levels of like dopamine, for example. And we all know what feeling low feels like, and that's from you know artificially or induced low levels of neurotransmission. And so it's that feeling, I think, of weightlessness where we're just pleased to be where we're at, in a place of not needing to pursue pleasure, doing anything additional than what we already are. It's a place of not feeling weighted in any way, not feeling uncomfortable or discomfort. Just happy to be where we are, in the place of being, in the place of being present, where we're not wanting for anything, and we're not wishing for anything to go away. We just are where we are.
So a question that came to mind when you were explaining balance, that's very it's fascinating to me, because when I think about balance, I don't think um, I don't think as a destination. Is always very dynamic. It's always moving. So how do how do we kind of get to accept that balance is not a destination, not a place to stay, but something to dance with? I go back to this metaphor of dancing. It's almost like moving with the movement itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think life is the catalyst to that swaying back and forth. Again, if you think of it as a seesaw, there's very little that takes the seesaw to come out of balance one way or the other. And life is that catalyst. And so, you know, uh, there's just all kinds of things in life that are going to disrupt the pleasure pain balance, and and how we choose to partake in that life, and what we choose to access ourselves to, and how we respond and deal with life's challenges as they come up, because again, that's part of life. We're also imperfect beings, right? That's part of being human. And so imperfection, inherent imperfection, is going to cause that that seesaw to teeter uh, back and forth. And so I don't think there's any way to avoid. It's inevitable that, like you say, it's a balance. So the question becomes, how far out of balance do we want to let it become? How far to pain and how far to pleasure do we want to teeter? And I, after a lot of learning in my life, has recognized that I would really like the balance to be, the seesaw to be more or less, more in balance than not, because I've experienced high levels of pleasure and high levels of pain that accompany it, as the seesaw tries to find its homeostasis again. So the more pleasure you pursue, the more pain that's going to follow. And I think just understanding that, from a neuroscientific point of view, is helpful, because you know that when you experience great degrees of pleasure, that pain is going to follow. And I think we've all experienced that in our lives. No one's had a perfect life. They've had moments of pleasure, they've had moments of pain. I think, hopefully, we can all kind of look at our lives and say, more or less they balance themselves out. And that's just a natural part of life.
I wonder if simplicity, kind of committing to a way of living that's natural and simple, is that something that you teach, that you have been practicing yourself and passing on to your clients as well, and people who listen to you? Simplicity and being natural.
Yeah. So natural life pleasures. Again, my story involves addiction to substances. So I obviously was reaching for something not natural. There's nothing natural about drugs and alcohol and the human brain. They don't go together. As a matter of fact, drugs and alcohol destroy the brain and malfunction it. So our brain was designed for natural pleasures. Um, it's wired for eating, for experiencing reward around eating, drinking water, socializing with friends, staying safe. Um, we're meant to, procreate, meet a mate, make babies so the species can evolve and continue. So these are all natural life pleasures that we're meant to feel reward from. And it's meant to give us reward levels, in a certain range, right? Our brains aren't meant to get reward that rises above these natural life pleasures. Drugs and alcohol deliver dopamine spikes, motivational reward, in the 5 to 10 times what natural rewards are meant to deliver. The problem with that, our brains begin to change, maladapt, malfunction, which can cause permanent damage. It causes the thinking part of our brain to get damaged. And again, whenever we experience that much pleasure, invariably the scale tips back and we experience that equal amount of pain. So, in my opinion, from my experience, that staying in this natural pleasure zone where we kind of experience pleasure, gradually we go up. It feels natural, it feels great, and then we just slowly and gradually come back down to homeostasis, where there's not a ton of pain accompanying it. It's a better bandwidth to stay within than these high levels of pain and pleasure.
So going back to your story, because we are within that realm of your experience with addiction and recovery.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit more about your story in the sense of how the substance that you got addicted to, but most importantly, what was the cause, the root cause? You said that in your bio, recovery wasn't just about sobriety for me. It was also about understanding the root causes of what led to my addiction. So that was actually one of the main questions when it comes to your story. What was the main cause? But you can give us a little bit of an overview of the whole picture.
So in my own situation, I have addiction in my family. The entire my mom's side of the family were addicted to one thing or another. Numerous deaths were caused from it. So many people have genetic predispositions to addiction, and that means their genes are predisposed to it possibly expressing itself. And that doesn't mean they will become addicts. It means that they're more predisposed to it. So there are things that can trigger that gene expression, such as trying drugs and alcohol and repeatedly trying them can cause the genes to express. Also, adverse childhood experiences are like trauma. They stress the brain out, and that can cause the genes to express. Additionally, adverse childhood experiences that are traumatic cause mental patterns that are very uncomfortable. They can cause self-doubt, self-esteem issues, anxiety, depression, and those are things that are uncomfortable. And then if someone starts to drink or use drugs, they discover that those mental discomforts get medicated and they feel better. And so a combination of those two things, having a predisposition genetically to addiction and also having adverse childhood experiences, the combination of those things makes it much, much, much more likely that someone will become an addict should they start to drink and use drugs. And that's what happened to me. I have a lot of predisposition to addiction in my genes, and then I had some adverse childhood experiences, which made me uncomfortable in my own skin. I started drinking and using in college and discovered I felt a whole lot better, you know, in many ways. And I kept coping. I brought those discomforts with me um, into adulthood, and I started coping with a number of different negative mental feelings. I had behaviors that weren't very good, like getting angry easily, being emotionally reactive. You know, you can see a picture of me there hitting my bottom in my early 50s. And so that's what happened is I just kept using drugs and alcohol. At the age of 52, I hit a bottom. At the end, I was taking 50 pain pills a day and drinking 2 bottles of vodka. So it got really bad. And that's what happens with addiction. It gets progressive, and addiction gets a hold of you. It really malfunctions your brain, and it just takes over everything in your brain. Nothing else is important. And you'll do anything you can to get the substance because, as we were talking about earlier, when you try to feed your pleasure circuits with drugs and alcohol, you are feeding it so much pleasure inducing chemical that pain is on the other side. And so that's what happens is we experience withdrawal, which is very painful. And that's the scale in our brain trying to find its equilibrium and its homeostasis. And so we have to keep using drugs and alcohol to stop the pain. And that's just this, really deleterious cycle that we go through in addiction. So yeah, that was my story. And, I was sitting in rehab. I can remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was 12 years ago, and had to ask myself, how did I get there? And, was there any second chapter in my life? Was this going to be it? Is this how I wanted to be remembered and go out? And I was able to kind of summon the wherewithal within to give it another shot, and started off in a 12-step program. And that kind of led to a process of self-discovery where I wanted to learn more about myself, what had happened internally, what was change going to look like. And so I started reading a lot of books on spirituality, on psychology. And then that led me to the brain, where I became fascinated with how all this happens in the brain, and not only how addiction had how addiction had affected my brain, but also how I was going to change my brain out of those patterns of addiction into some other way of living. And I was very happy to find out that the brain is forgiving, that through a process called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's natural ability to change, adapt, and evolve, that there was hope for me and for anyone else that doesn't like where they are at the moment. They can they can change their feelings, thoughts, and actions. And then as they do that and practice those new habits that they're trying to learn, their brain actually repatterns itself. It reorganizes itself. The actual neurons in your brain, of which there are 85 billion, they begin to move around and shift around to represent new patterns that you're introducing to it, that you're practicing, and they begin to leave behind or have the old patterns weaken. And I've got a great analogy for that. Okay, so these old patterns that we develop over years, I liken it to like an old oak tree that sits in your backyard. And this oak tree has these old gnarly roots that have grown stronger and stronger over the years. And they really gnarly and squiggly and crabbly and all of that. And they're beginning to, because they're not pleasant and they're leading to uncomfortableness in our lives, they're beginning to uplift the patio, right? They're getting underneath the patio and they're beginning to cause cracks. We've all seen that. And those cracks are the consequences in our lives that these negative patterns are causing. So the negative thinking, the negative feeling, the negative actions and behaviors, they're all starting to cause consequences. Okay, so it's like, what do we do now? We're in this place. We're not happy with how things are going, our mental activity. And so can we change? The answer is yes. And so what we do is then we have to say enough is enough. I'm going to become different. What does that look like? And, that's what I help people do, is identify what this new life looks like. And so what we do is we go across the yard to another place in the yard, away from the old crab tree, and we plant a brand new small little sapling tree that represents this person's new way of wanting to be. And we spend a lot of time around that person. We draw a picture of that person. We talk about how that person thinks and feels and reacts to stress, and how they want to act and behave, and what their values are, what their strengths are, what their beliefs are, what their psychological needs are. And we really outline that person. And that person is now young and like reborn, and we're just planning it. Okay. And so what we have to do is determine how that person acts, thinks, feels, and then repeat those over and over again. And so you can no longer act like you used to. You have to think, feel, and act like you want to. And then as you do that, you are like fertilizing and watering this new little tree. And each repetition of behaving and acting and thinking and feeling like this new person, you are watering and fertilizing those roots, and those roots are beginning to take hold and grow stronger. And that's the analogy for your neurons beginning to shift around in your brain and forming new patterns, new roots. And the more you do it, the more repetition that you cycle through, the stronger and more defined and more potent these roots are and these patterns are. And so that's the process of transformation, of what happens gradually. But you have to stay in the habit of reinforcing these new patterns. Otherwise, they won't grow stronger. And if, basically you're looking at, 90 days before you begin to really experience all the great benefits of having changed your ways of being. And these ways of beings are now solidified in your brain as neural patterns, neural pathways. And you find yourself just automatically acting in these new ways without having to try as much. At the beginning, it's hard because they're new. It's the same thing as learning any new instrument or new athletic endeavor, or learning a new language. It's hard at the beginning because you don't know how, and it's new. But over time, as you begin to practice, it gets easier. And so learning new mental activity, learning a new mental way of being is the same as learning anything new. It's hard at the beginning, and our brain has to get used to it and begin to learn and form memories and get some reward from acting and feeling this way. And once it does, it begins to like it, and it wants more of it. And so this is just a gradual process. And a lot of us quit early on in the stage because we're not good at it, and it feels not satisfying, and we get frustrated. And so our brain doesn't want to do it anymore, because the brain wants to experience goodness and feelings of reward. And so that's why we have to intervene and constantly force ourselves to practice, knowing that down the road in 60, 90 days, the reward is going to be there. But it takes a lot of intervention on our part to stick with it.
Yes. And that's why having a coach, a guide really helps, right, George? I really see that.
Yeah, someone that's been through it, that can encourage the person, because they know that, when you're stuck in it and you're trying to do it yourself, you're the one who's feeling all this negativity about the change not coming as fast as you would like. But the coach knows that, he can see that you're actually making progress. He can encourage, he can be your accountability partner to make sure that you stay on track. And that's why, it helps to have someone guiding in this process, because, they're the ones holding your hand, so to speak, and making sure that you're progressing, and you stay with it long enough to begin to experience the benefits on your own so that you can see them. And then you begin to self manage, at the end of a period, instead of having to have someone else be, as influential as they are. But for a while, a lot of times it's what it takes.
Question that comes to me is about the qualities. What have you seen so far, as far as the almost like the qualities required to have initially to facilitate transformation? Do you see that like in some humans more than others?
Yeah, and the two things that people need to bring are motivation and commitment. They're not going to know how, and that's what a coach is there to do, is to provide the roadmap and the process. But the individual has to summon the motivation and the commitment. And so, yeah, some people are born with, more natural inclination towards being motivated and more natural inclination to being committed. Those are strengths, but again, it's a matter of tethering, tapping into what is out there. What is this going to be once I get there? And really spending a lot of time visualizing it, emotionally feeling how much better it's going to be, and constantly going back to that place repeatedly to develop the motivation, because motivation is tied to reward. Motivation in the brain means it means getting a reward, and so we have to constantly dangle that for the brain to want to continue on. And so that's why we have to keep going back to this visualization of what this is going to be like repeatedly, so that that reward is kept alive. And then the matter of commitment is, there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be times that it doesn't go well. It can be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's just part of life. But what happens when we do get that setback? Are we committed enough, to then stay the course? So those are the two qualities that people need to have, are commitment and motivation.
One of the things for me, having the childhood adversities, lots of them, lots of trauma, it became very clear that throughout my life, it felt like an addiction. It was to connect with people in a deeper way, like when I felt understood, felt seen, I could see them too. So that go back to the balance of, it's almost like experiencing healthy relationships everywhere with my friends, with everybody. So, and that became almost felt like an obsession type of thing. And even today, it feels like a motivation to me. And it feels like it's almost trying to bring that balance again, for part of my brain that changed with the traumas and then became very disconnected from other humans. So how do you see that now? I'm just wondering. Now you just made me think about that. Am I still going this trying to rewire the brain, or now I'm already established and I'm just trying to, trying to figure out where I am with that balance scale that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So I think what I heard you say is that, there was a time of your life initiated by trauma and an experience that, you had difficulty with people and the relationships, and now you're finding that it's a great source of pleasure, and one that you've almost become addicted to. Um, so the brain is naturally wired to want to seek out social relationships. We're hardwired that way. We're hardwired to procreate and have the species continue on. We're hardwired to eat and to drink water so that we survive, and we're hardwired to have these social relationships, because early on in the caveman days, we all had to kind of band together in groups in order to protect ourselves against the big dinosaurs. And so that is wiring that we have, and it makes us feel good. And so, I think what, was disrupted in you and many other people, and, even myself, because we had relationships that weren't productive. So we had a different association with relationships. But you were you, and for example, in clients that I might coach, what we would want to do, because we know that inherently natural wiring, we do get enjoyment out of relationships, is we want to reconstruct, deconstruct why relationships haven't worked for us in the past, realize that, that wasn't our fault. It was something that, happened, it was done to us, but it's not how we want to experience relationships. And so maybe those few that gave us really bad versions of relationships, we can analyze and deconstruct and say, well, this is why it happened, but it doesn't have to define me. It doesn't have to define my view of relationships. And I really would like that in my new life, the new version of myself that I'm trying to build. And so then, you obviously took that upon yourself to experiment with forming new relationships that were more positive, and you started to have some success with it. And you started to then fully experience what having positive relationships, how rewarding they can be. And so then it was like a light went off in you. You had an epiphany. And so your brain said, wow, I once thought that relationships were harmful and negative, and now I recognize that they're not. I'm leaving that old version, old pattern of how I viewed relationships. I'm leaving that behind, as like putting it up as a book on a bookshelf, as a previous chapter of my life. And now I'm going to redefine and reconstruct how I want relationships to be. And then you started to experience it. And so, the reason you're so addicted to it is because it's like this newfound epiphany that is now you've turned a negative into a positive, and it's become so rewarding for you that you just, and a source of such enjoyment, that you want more of it.
Is there such a thing as a good and a bad addiction? Like in this case, it doesn't feel like it is harming in any way, although I work a lot. But I don't think it's. Do you think that that is? Is there such a thing as a good addiction? I'm just wondering here.
Yeah. So part of the addiction definition of addiction is that it's causing damage to us, and we continue to do it despite harmful consequences. Okay. And so, you know, if there's nothing harmful happening in your pursuits, you're simply pursuing a reward that is not hurting you or anyone else. Um, so if there's no harmful consequence, I don't see that there being a problem with it.
Okay, so we cannot use the term addiction. It cannot be good addiction, bad addiction. It's just addiction is something inherently something that is harmful. So that's good to know. Yes, I have heard also, some people they have made beautiful, I mean, amazing contributions within humanity. They have helped so many people, and I've seen clearly that they kind of lost the sense of balance too. That they went one way, almost 100%, working really hard, focusing to get something to happen, to make something happen that could help humanity. They were very focused. They knew what they wanted, and they would go to the end. It just didn't matter to them how much they would give. So I guess I was trying to think about what would be the balance there. Is there something in life that sometimes it's so worthy, doing that we just lose track of balance and just give ourselves to life entirely?
Yeah, well, I mean, each of us is allowed to pursue our what is purposeful, meaningful, and then the calling in life, that delivers the most meaning and purpose, right? again, without being harmful to others. And so, I don't, in terms of this balance, I mean, the balance I'm referring to in the brain is the pleasure and pain. Um, I'm just not sure that, and I'm just thinking out loud, how much that relates to pursuing a noble cause. To the that someone is pursuing something like love, um, at the ignorance of everything else. I mean, I don't see how that puts you out of balance. Um, you might be, I guess, disappointed that you're not getting the results you want, or that you're not seeing the fruits of your labor, or that people aren't in alignment with you. Maybe that's the pain component. But having this deep sense of what's right, um, and trying to help others. Um, if that puts you out of balance, then I think it's worthy to be out of balance.
Another thing, I want to go back to, we're almost at the end, but I want to tap into what you said earlier about natural pleasures. What would be natural pleasures, specifically, George, for example?
Well, anything that any activity in your life that delivers to you positive feelings, which are represented in the body and the brain as neurotransmitters, endorphins, oxytocin, um, dopamine, serotonin. Um, so things like relationships, like we've talked about, um, you know, exercise, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, hiking, nature, animals, pets, gardening, um, hobbies. Um, these are all things that you can bring into your life to help give you natural pleasure, things that make you feel good, that aren't harmful to others, that help soothe you, that you can go to and utilize to condition your nervous system, have it be more soothed, have a lower baseline, your nervous system. And then also, as uncomfortable things happen to you in life, and you have emotional reactions or negative thinking, these are things that you can go to and utilize to help regulate those. So in other words, if you're caught in a bad moment, something stressful happened to you and you've got negative thinking, negative thoughts, why not go take a hike, or go work out, or go do yoga, or go play with an animal? It won't be long doing those things that you will completely forget and transition out of what was bothering you, and you've replaced it with something positive. And that's really what we're after here, is to be able to understand and relate with our mind closely enough that we don't get overwhelmed by what happens in it. We recognize it for what it is, allow it to exist, but then know immediately that it's a transitory occurrence, and that we have tools in our disposal that to give us natural highs that we can immediately turn to cause diffusion of this uncomfortable mental experience. And so, just having this relationship with our brain and our mind, and knowing how it works, and knowing how to work with it, and develop a relationship that you can develop over time and become more and more better at it, in terms of having it respond the way that you want. And what happens over time is that you start getting fewer and fewer of these negative experiences, because you spend so much time in the positive, and knowing how to respond, that you just spend less time in the negative. It's these new neural pathways that develop.
Regarding the brain and the mind, so I know with neuroscience, they do believe that the brain, it's creating the thoughts, right? Is that the main the way of that they understand how the mind and the brain work, or because I would love to mention something about the way I have seen, I experience that. interaction myself. I'm very open to, let's say, inspiration. So a lot of times I feel like it's not my brain that's generating thoughts, but it's almost like it's being a receptor for thoughts, for inspiration, for visions. So I would love to hear from you. I know you're coming from the neuroscience background, and that's your basis. But do you also see the other way around, that we can be inspired by by something else, and then we are becoming a receptor for something that's not physical?
Yeah. So a couple things. One is the brain is the physical, biological entity that sits on our shoulders, in our skull. The mind is created by the brain. It emerges from the brain. All mental life, whether it's a thought, a feeling, an action, a perception, an inspiration, an interpretation, anything that enters our mind is scientifically proven to be constructed in real time by a set of ingredients. Um, it's constructed from our senses, what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting in the moment. It's constructed by our core affect, what's happening in our body at the time. Are we feeling pleasant, unpleasant? Are we activated or calm? It's constructed by the context. What is in that moment, the environment that we're experiencing outside of us that is happening, that's leading to this occurrence. And also by our attention, like what are we locked on? Like, are we locked? What is out there that we're locked in on? And then lastly, our conceptual understanding or our past experiences. So, there are, when things occur in our brain is using these 5 different ingredients every single time. It's like baking a cake and coming up with what comes up in our mind. Okay. And what happens is the brain goes into its filing cabinet, into its memory, and pulls out past experiences that most represent what we're experiencing right now and predicts how you should think and feel in that moment. So you, as someone who gets inspired a lot, you have created a lot of past memories and experiences related to being inspired. Okay, so your brain is used to thinking in this way and looking at the environment and what's happening around you and getting inspired and thinking in certain ways. You have developed neural patterns that represent that way of thinking. And so that's why they keep recurring to you, is because you have all these past experiences of having these mental occurrences. And so your brain keeps going and retrieving them for what's happening right now and encouraging you and predicting that you should feel this way again. And so that is exactly how scientifically mental life occurs, is through a real-time construction from all these ingredients that are around us in the moment, and then goes and retrieves from our memory how it thinks you should feel right now based on how you've felt similarly in the past.
Yes, and I'm wondering here if you also have considered, because it's something that we cannot ignore, the evidence of past life experiences. So when you speak of past, would that be memories from past lives as well? Do you believe in life after life?
I haven't delved into that enough to have an opinion. Um, I'm still trying to figure out this life, but let me just say this. However it is that your memories became your memories, whether they're from this life or a previous life, they are now in your brain as represented as neural pathways that represent previous experiences that your brain can then go to and retrieve as information to determine how it thinks you should think and feel in this moment. So, um, yeah, that's as much as I think I can say on that.
Yes, I like the way you said that, George. I'm trying to figure out this life. And that's something in spiritual teachers, they always say that go back to the moment, be present, be here. There's always, but I can't help it. I just, it just comes to me. It's very magical. Life to me is very magical. It's beautiful, miraculous. So there's something about that I'm always embracing in the moment, the joy of being around people having these kind of conversations, the deep connection with soul. Some people call the soul the spirit. I don't know. You could call the brain too, the mind, doesn't matter. But there's something that is feels very much beyond the physical to me. It's really like we're connecting now. We are not physically close to one another, but there's something so warm, so I don't know, that I feel like I already know you. Like everybody that meet here, when I meet them in person, I get to meet some of my guests. I feel like I met them already for thousands of years. It's almost like a friend. Like, oh my God, I feel like I know you already.
Yeah, there's definitely energy exchange between people. That's um, I'm not sure of all the science behind it, but there definitely we emit as human beings a lot of energy, um, and so there's a sharing of that when we're in each other's presence for sure.
Thank you so much again for doing what you do, for answering these questions. I was trying to be as spontaneous as possible here in the moment and come up with I'm very curious about everything. I wanted to mention your website, georgehaymaker.com, and you offer lots of different kinds of one-on-one coaching, and you have coaching programs, lots of them too. Would you like to actually elaborate them here, George, in the end? Because I have a lot of information here about your services, but is there anything that you want to close with?
Yeah, so it's I'll help anybody with any kind of change and transformation. It's at a very deep level. It's not surface oriented. It's actually, tethering the change that you want to create to the fabric of who you are, your identity. It makes it long lasting and sustainable. And I work with individuals one on one. I work with working professionals. I work with companies to help them understand how their employees' brains work so they can achieve more productivity. So it's a variety of different people that I work with, people that are struggling with addiction. So all of this is change, and it all is represented in the brain. And it really doesn't matter what type of change. It just matters that it happens transformationally and sustainably by having the brain rewire and repattern itself.
Out of my curiosity, again, I can't help it. One of the areas that you focus on is described as narcissism. So anger, bullying, harassment, grandiosity, and I think it was entitlement, all those personality traits. I have heard that it's really not something that happens often, that somebody with these traits, they would look for help. So I'm wondering if they are stemming from different kinds of problems, is that from personality disorders, obviously narcissism is connected to it, but also like addiction. Is narcissistic traits connected to addiction as well?
It can be because, again, narcissists, um, depending on the form and type and all the rest, they're not really very comfortable people in their own skins. It's not, really comfortable to treat people the way that narcissists can treat people. And the way that they ended up that way is again through adverse childhood experiences. Maybe they were raised by narcissistic parents, and therefore the child did not, get love unless they achieved, or did not get unconditional love unless, they behaved a certain way. And so that was harmful to them at a very deep level. And they learned to cope by, you know, following the same patterns as what they were taught. But it's just not a comfortable existence. And so then a lot of times that, the person will medicate because they're not comfortable with addictive substances, but it may or may not have a connection. It doesn't have to one way or the other. Um, a lot of times I'll work with companies that have someone in their employ that is displaying narcissistic tendencies, they happen to do very well in their jobs because they're highly demanding of themselves and others, but they are displaying behaviors that are counterproductive to the work culture, and so the company might want me to come in and help work with that individual so they can start to see what's happening, at a deep level, and then hopefully they're willing to undergo, training and begin to see others' perspectives and how they might adjust their own behavior to be more of a collaborative type of person within the company.
Is there anything that you left unsaid for today? Anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, just a note of hope and encouragement that all of us struggle. It's not just you, um, and and it isn't you. It's what's happened to you, and it's the patterns that have been created over your lifetime that lead you to be how you are today. And so, the brain can change. It's there to be your partner. You just have to look at it differently than perhaps you have in the past, and ask it to come along with you and be who you'd prefer it to be. But scientifically, the brain is more than capable of change. There's just very specific ways that it wants to change and is willing to change. So you just have to bring the motivation and commitment, and then someone else can help you with the how-to.
My last question is, how do you describe this idea of freedom? This platform is titled "The Freedom to Feel" for a reason. That has been my recognition of feelings, how important they were, to let them flow. But how do you see the concept from a bigger perspective? What is freedom to you?
I guess I'd say it's the ability to choose, um, the ability to feel, equal opportunity to be able to become who you want to be, um, and achieve what you want to achieve. Um, yeah, I guess that's how I would describe it.
Yeah. And that takes the work of knowing oneself, isn't it? That the self-awareness, self-knowledge, and all that. The work that you help others see, so many beautiful people help others to do, the recognition of what we are, who we are. Thank you so much again for your presence, and we'll talk soon. We'll be in touch again, George. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me.